Hey there, I hope you're well. A bit of a different video today. I want to talk about what the organizational structure looks like in a company, and a specific type of company, modern product company. Some people call them SaaS companies. I'll explain why that's not always 100% accurate. But the reason I'm doing this video is because if you've never worked in such a company, then you might not know what it looks like on the inside. And even as a DevOps engineer or a developer or pretty much any piece of the puzzle, you may not know how you fit in, who you might talk to, what your mission is, and how it fits into the overall goals of the organization. So that's what I'm going to attempt to show you today. Now, I will say up front that every company is different. There's not necessarily a standard, but I'm going to take you from a very quick look at how a startup will typically look, and then from there we're going to get into the meat of this, which is really a company of 50 to 100 people, or maybe 50 to 200. After 200 it quite radically changes, and also going from a startup to suddenly getting some real growth, it also changes there. I'm not going to talk about series of funding and stuff like that. I'm not really up to speed with all that. That is kind of interesting, but I honestly wouldn't be able to tell you. So yeah, and also just to let you know, so a lot of people, if you work for a company that's more traditional and does, let's say, I don't know, manufacturing or finance, or I'm talking specifically about companies, so maybe not so much finance, but companies that don't really do any of their own internal development. So maybe you're being part of, let's call it core IT. They don't really have a software development lifecycle for you to look after. Then yeah, you may not know about the type of company I'm about to tell you. And the same would also apply if you come from more of a services company. So your company's main business goal is to provide IT services to other companies, and you go in and you do an engagement, you do a job. You might be there for a year, it could be more, it could be less, and then you move on, and you don't really stay for the long-term journey. And you're typically working for one team, maybe even reporting to one person, one main stakeholder. So you don't really have an idea of how the organization works. It's very different if you go to a product or what some people prefer to call a SaaS company. So let me get started. Right, what I'm gonna say first of all is, like, what is a product company? And yeah, it's not a services company, which I'm going to say is like engaging with other companies, where you would have, like, you would have a contract which is typically called the statement of work. So it's not that, and it's not a company that doesn't make any software. So it has no software development life cycle to speak of, and because of that, then there isn't really any DevOps, because DevOps is all about automating this life cycle to make it happen more quickly. Sorry, let me just make that a bit bigger. Yeah. So what it is it's a company that will be making we could say SaaS, which a lot of people, software as a service, obviously, if you didn't know. Yeah, such a fancy name, but it basically means that for most people they think it's this. They think it's web-based software, right? Which it is in many cases, but not all. So it can also be that you are just providing an API. I say for sale, but really it's kind of like you're renting it, But anyway, it's an API service. So obviously there's not many regular Joes, regular consumers who are purchasing APIs to use. This is typically B2B. And some companies will do both. They might be B2B, but they provide both an API and a web front end. So that's definitely not uncommon. I'll just say here that this is B2C and B2B. Now sometimes it's things completely different. So for example, I recently interviewed with a company. Unfortunately, I didn't get invited to meet the manager, which was kind of annoying because they insisted that I had Google, be up and running, to hit the ground running with Google Cloud, which, I know all three clouds, but I didn't most recently work with Google Cloud, and they're all the same anyway, so whatever. But it was a company that had, let's call it an innovative supply chain product. It was kind of like data analytics product, and this was B2B. I've interviewed with another company that provided like a kind of marketplace for structured products, which is a let's just call this a financial marketplace. It was something very unique, and it was a marketplace, and they also provided a lot of extra value. So yeah, and in that case they provided both the web and the API. In fact, they even did private labeling, so companies can actually sell their service but brand it with their own brand. So that was quite interesting. But what they all have in common here, all of these product companies, is they're all developing a product. Some people might call it a service, but it's not really. I want to differentiate that it's not a services company. Services typically means consulting, okay? Whereas a product, even if you might think of it as like a service, like an API, some people might call a service, it's really a product. So a product company develops a product and then sells it. So this is what I'm going to talk. And obviously, there's been a lot of these companies in the last 10 to 15 years. This is what the market loves, because what they typically do, their product, it's not like SAP, it's not like an ERP like Workday or CRM like SAP. It's all-in-one thing. It's definitely not all-in-one. More does one thing and does it well. And it came out of the lean startup movement, and that's where you see a lot of the growth now in recent companies, from startup to bigger. So let's look at what this kind of company would look like. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the I'll just put that up there. We don't need to read that right now. I'm just going to park that over there. We're going to start with a startup. So now a startup almost always starts with two people. So you've got the CEO, two founders basically, the CEO and the CTO. And the CEO is more it's more about getting the business. And what I mean by that, because I know business could be a vague word, but this is like the sales side, getting revenue. Sales, maybe marketing as well, I suppose, but it's getting people to buy the product. That's what they focus on. And the CTO is more about implementation. Let me just zoom in. And I should actually say this is tech implementation. And they'll be doing anything tech related, basically. So yeah, this is at the very, very beginning, that they might work like this for quite a long time. One person is more sales orientated, one person who's more tech orientated. Some people may be equal in both, but usually it's one or the other. And then what happens is, as they expand and they think, well, we can't do everything, and we're now starting to make some money. Let's get some more people in. So it could be that if we look on the CEO side, that I imagine probably one of the first things that you're going to do is get someone who can do, I say sales, but I mean that kind of really includes marketing. The CEO basically wants someone to help in getting business, so that they can now start to focus on other more strategic things as well. So basically just wants another person just like them. So I'm going to attempt to draw an arrow like that. Now, for the CTO, it's a kind of similar thing. They want someone who can implement the tech. So I would say, because they're probably doing this already, I would say they're probably going to get a developer. But I'm going to put here an all-rounder. And I'm also going to say, because this is going to be a theme that's going to continue for a while until they reach a certain size, not only are they going to develop the software, but they're also going to be doing the DevOps, i.e. the deployment side, the site reliability side as well. And that's just very standard. And they'll do that for a while. And notice we don't have any HR, we don't have a CFO who's head of finance. We don't have any of that yet. That will come later. So I haven't interviewed with companies this small, but I have interviewed with slightly larger companies, and I'm gonna share some of my experience here. So let's focus more on the CTO side. We'll come back to the business side later. Oops, let me just group these. There should be a group button here. Yep, it was just hidden here. So let's just move this over here. We'll come back to CEO and the other half of the business. So what's going to happen now is, in fact, you know what? I'm actually going to ungroup this. I'm going to group this instead. Here we go. So, okay, that's better. Sorry about that. Now, we're going to have a few more developers as well. So it's going to look something like this. It's going to have basically a small team of developers. They're still doing their own DevOps, and they're still reporting to the CTO as well. But they're not going to be doing any DevOps yet. They're not going to be hiring a separate DevOps engineer yet either, because there are other positions that they need to fill as they grow as well. So the developer is still going to be doing all that. So what happens next is the product development, by the way, is still done between the CEO and the CTO together. So what they're doing is they're identifying business opportunities, figuring out what they need as a product, and then how they can deliver on that technically, and feeding that information down as requirements to the developers. Now at this stage, for quite obvious reasons, technically the application stack should be extremely simple. They definitely should not be doing microservices or Kubernetes or anything like that. No way, because they're just not in a position to support that. Even though Kubernetes is pretty great, self-healing and all that kind of stuff, it's very, very stable, but they're not in a position to manage it if it starts to go really bad. So this would be probably the next stage. The CTO is working every day with the developers, really, really in the weeds with the product, but wants to focus more on strategy going forward, and also needs help with everything else that they're doing already. And I think probably the next stage, now I could be wrong here, some people may disagree with this, but sooner or later this role is going to get created, a product manager is needed. And what a product manager does is take the business opportunities, the business requirements, and translates those into an actual product and a product roadmap, what this product will look like even going in the future. It says, this is what we need. If we want to take advantage of this business opportunity, we need to make this product, and then I'm going to work with the tech team to determine what this product looks like, to create the stories, the epic, the stories, and set the priorities as well for the backlog and all those kind of things. So that's why I think this is probably what's next, the product manager. And the product manager I put on the side because it doesn't really sit in the middle. The product manager is not the boss of the developers, but works very, very closely with them. So that's what I've done here. And by the way, you may be wondering about a product owner. So a product owner is actually part of product management, and in many companies you just have a product manager who also does sort of PO duties. So if you've got a PM and a PO, the PO will typically be with the developer team more closely, and the PM will be more with the business development side of things. But many companies have just a product manager who basically does everything in that respect. So at this point is probably where you're going to hire a dev or a tech lead. Now, this person is not a manager of all the other devs. Is not a people manager, but this person is significantly more serious, that they're expected to provide leadership in this development team. And it will also help the CTO as well, because even though the CTO's got a product manager, the CTO is still pretty involved with the development team, but instead actually can speak more often with the lead instead, and then the lead can work with the rest of the team. It's also good for the product manager as well. Product manager, although they're close to all the developers, it will be quite handy that they have a lead that they can kind of lean on. So what I've done is I've simplified this dev team unit, and you can see there are 5 devs, 1 dev tech lead, and this is around about the time, I think, when it's found that the devs, you know, let's face it, most developers are not that hot with automating deployment infrastructure. It's just not their primary domain, and now is the time to get the so-called DevOps engineer. So we're going to put them here to sit with the team. There's only one team embedded, helping to speed up the development lifecycle, building out the pipelines and all the supporting tooling and all that kind of stuff. So the company now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, the company's probably about 20 people or so. So this is still a fairly small startup. We're not quite at the scale-up stage yet, but we probably will be fairly soon. And what's starting to happen now is the software should be getting more complex. It should have more customers. You wouldn't be hiring people unless you were getting revenue in. So it should be starting to show the revenue, probably not profitable yet, but starting to show the revenue, getting new rounds of investment because they're able to show that revenue that this product has promised. And at this stage, it's getting a little bit more difficult to manage as one whole team. Now this is when you're starting to break out into several different multiple services. This is like the beginning of the microservice world. So you're probably just going to have another team. So I'll show you. So things have changed significantly now. We now have 2 different teams to work on 2 different things. I don't necessarily want to call this service 1 and service 2. It could be by this stage there's actually a couple of services for the first team and a couple for the second, something like this. And at this stage you really need an engineering manager, because the CTO just cannot really have that many developers report to him anymore. I have seen this though at some companies where there are, you know, a dozen developers reporting to the CTO, and really it's just unmanageable. You can have that to an engineering manager, which is why I put that in here. So that's why they would have hired this person, created this new position. And also, there's kind of an expectation when you have a new position, an engineering manager, that they're kind of really going to drive the technical growth as well. So yeah, this is not unusual to be looking after 2 dev teams, and the product manager still kind of sits on the side, but pretty soon probably there's going to be another product manager. And something to bear in mind though about this position is this person, although originally they reported to the CTO, eventually in a much bigger organization they might actually report to their own C-level, like a chief product manager. But in other organizations it can differ quite wildly actually. So often they do report to the CTO, and if not, then it's like their own dedicated C-level product manager or product officer. And then at other times it could just be like almost any other C-level. So it's a bit weird. So I'm not really going to say who they report to, because it differs from company to company, but they are a very important part of the business. They sit between the business that we drew earlier and also between this tech organization, and they're in very close contact to the development teams. I think for now I'm still just going to call this a product manager slash product owner, just to make it a bit more clear about their combination of duties. Okay, so we've jumped ahead a bit now, and what I've done is I'm now showing the whole organization again, but let's just start again with the CTO's world. Has the engineering manager as before, and now I mean there'd actually probably be fewer developers because you start spreading them out a bit. So I'm just gonna remove some of these developers. You might not even have a lead in some of them, but it's right about this time where you start having more dev teams. And I've shown here that a PM or a PO will typically have 1 or more teams that they work with. So in the bottom case it's only 1, but obviously they'll probably have another one as they expand and have more work to do. And this is around about the time when you're going to start to have microservices, because each team will be responsible for 1 or maybe 2 services. So you can see that would be a minimum of 3 services, or it could be like say up to 6 services. And this is around the time when you want to probably start using containerization and having microservices, and not putting everything on one gigantic server that you vertically scale. So you could go straight to Kubernetes, or you could just go to something like containers as a service, like ECS. And and by the way, I think around about this time you're probably going to have less of this dedicated embedded DevOps engineer, and instead you're just going to have two team members on the side who are still going to be kind of versatile, but they'll work with all the teams. So this will be more how it looks. Now back on the more business end of things, sales and marketing team by this time will be significantly bigger. So I said here nominally 6 people working in sales, maybe 1 in marketing. The CEO will have an assistant by this time, and this person will be doing general office management, but also HR as well. You wouldn't have someone from legal yet, but that's probably going to happen soon, because you're reaching that level of complexity pretty soon. Also, if you look over here, I've also put a CFO, because around this time you really need to have a dedicated CFO, and they'll have a finance team, and I've just put 1 person there because that's probably how it looks. Now there's also this big cloud here, and the reason I put this here is because remember I spoke about how the product managers, the PMs, the POs, they translate business opportunities into a product roadmap that then they work closely with the dev teams to execute on that technically. But those business opportunities, they're not necessarily the ones to always identify them, and they also don't come necessarily from sales. Salespeople are just all about selling. So you might have this sort of business development department, which I put it in a cloud because it looks different from one company to another. It can look very, very different. So that's why I just left it as a cloud. But yeah, you can see now how things better flow. And we're now at the stage where we're sort of a larger startup starting to get into the small scale-up territory, which is what I'm going to show you next. Okay, so we fast forward a bit more, and I've made a few changes here as the company has expanded. We now have 4 different dev teams, and I've actually split this out. This is actually wrong. Let me just edit this. There we go, that's better. So yeah, a product owner now, not a combined product manager / product owner, will be responsible for being close to the dev teams. I've even moved this this green box closer to the dev teams just to show that they're in that proximity. And then a product manager who's more about strategy. The POs are more about tactics, the product manager is more about strategy and roadmap, etc. will take care of that. So different roles. Sometimes the PO in some companies is even a scrum master, so it's quite a versatile role. And yeah, the DevOps is still down here, as it's kind of like its own team. I haven't embedded them anywhere because they really have to serve everyone. And here I've also put, for example, it's not only developers that are in these different teams. It can also be, for example, a couple of data scientists that were needed as the nature of the work evolved. And over here also I put a couple of new ones. By this time you're probably going to hire someone from HR. You need a dedicated HR person. I populated the finance team to show a couple of people there, which is probably likely. I put a CLO for a chief legal officer. By this time you probably need someone who's in charge of looking after legal matters for the company, because you're so big, you're just going to have work there. And as I said before, there's still a bunch of people in business development. Now, I put a couple here in the wings. Really, these are more as a team, as the company grows. And some companies may have them, some not. So you may have service management. You may have customer success. The customer success is really kind of similar to sales and marketing, I would say, in the sense that you're trying to basically squeeze as much money out of your, especially business customers. You're trying to tie them into long contracts and make a lot of money. So the name's a bit strange. I mean, obviously the point is to have success for the customer, but also it's success for this company as well. But yeah, it should ideally be a win-win situation. You're not going to try and rope customers into deals that they don't want. You want to understand their needs better. And also, this is a route for developers to find out what are the new features that customers are asking for. So it's actually quite an important part. And when you get into a company that's kind of like 200-300 or more, that's when the customer success team will start to increase. But before then, you might also have a service management team. Now, not all companies will have this, but this is important if you've got particularly some major stakeholders. So it could be, for example, that your company is actually owned by a consortium of several companies that came together, that wanted to develop a useful product just for them, but there wasn't one company that wanted to take on that particular business, including the risk. So they formed as a consortium a new company to do that for them. They are the main customers, the main stakeholders, and they will communicate with the company via a service management organization or department. And so, going back to our interactions now, just to sort of close this out, as a DevOps engineer, eventually you will be in your own department, and this will grow as well, and you'll have juniors, mids, and seniors. Initially you'll report to the engineering manager, but over time you may get your own manager. And what will typically happen then, if you have your own manager, is that manager will work in concert with the engineering manager. They see themselves, or they should do, as equals really, and they will both have an open dialogue with the CTO. So that's what often happens as this team grows bigger. In fact, what I would say is when this team is big enough that it basically becomes a platform team, and that's the point at which definitely there'll be a platform manager who will be on the same level as the engineering manager, report to the CTO. But by that time there'll probably be, I would say, another couple of teams here. You probably have half a dozen to a dozen microservices by that stage, and microservices really suit this type of organizational structure. This side of the business will look a bit opaque to you because you won't be interacting with sales and marketing. You really won't have any interaction with them. They will not be on your case. They will not be communicating with you. Everything will flow from the PMs and the POs, who you will work very closely with, especially the POs. You should be working quite closely with them. Now, they'll work closer with the developers probably than the DevOps engineers, but it is good if you have relations with them. So yeah, the left side of the company is a little bit opaque, but it doesn't matter. One thing I will also add is by that time there should also probably be a security department, and that will probably have, I would say, a couple of team members. I don't know what you want to call them, security or infosec engineers or something like that. Well, I guess the head will probably call himself something else, head of security or something, but you get my drift. This is pretty much how it would look as expansion goes forward. And then what happens is, assuming the company has a great amount of success, this starts to look more and more complex. There has to be a bit of re-engineering of the organization, especially as it gets to the low hundreds and then getting into the thousands. It can look very, very different, extremely different, and you'll have, at this stage, every developer knows one another, but at that stage, when you reach over there, different teams won't even be aware of each other. So this is a very interesting time to be involved in a company. The great thing is you can be super hands-on. You get exposure to a lot of different tools. There's almost no bureaucracy or red tape. You'll have full admin rights on your laptop. You can do pretty much everything that you want. Of course, by now, everything is even from the beginning, it should be infrastructure as code. So there's still structure, there's still oversight. So those are all good things. Despite your size, you still have that solid structure. But you get to learn an incredible amount and get to do a bit of everything. And you also get to have quite a big say as well. Your voice is heard. It's not like there's no dictatorship going on where whatever the engineering manager says, that absolutely must go. They should be consulting everybody below them and asking them, what do you think? What are you hearing? You know your domain the best, so please tell me, because I need to know this as we strategize going forward, and pretty much keeps everyone happy. So this is a good sized company to work for, I would say. So anyway, a bit of a long ramble and a bit of a weird video this, but I hope some of you still enjoyed this anyway. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. I will see you again soon. Take care. Bye bye.